order. As a courtesy to others, please silence your cell phones during the meeting. I'm turning mine off and engage in conversations outside the chamber. And Madam Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Bilbray. Councilmember Patton.
Here.
Councilmember Bragg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Spriggs.
Here.
Mayor Dedina.
Here. And now, it's our favorite part of the evening. I would like to invite Crystal Mendoza, a sixth grade student at Berry School, my elementary school. Actually was there when Berry School opened in January 1972. I was the first group of students that started there. And Crystal, before you start, let me just read something about you, how great you are. And her teacher says, Crystal is a respectful and responsible student. She is a lieutenant on safety patrol. I was also on the safety patrol this year and has shown great leadership skills. She is a hard worker and kind to others. She is also very helpful. She not only helps her peers in class, but also wants to help out the community. She spent one of her lunch recesses this year helping the Jose Montaño Foundation by putting together snack bags for hospital patients and their families. Thank you very much for doing that. Crystal has a positive attitude and comes to school every day with a smile on her face. So thank you so much for being here. You can start.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any agenda changes?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to pull the warrant register, item 2.2. I had about 3 items there that were fairly large expenditures I'd like to ask questions about.
Okay. We need to get approval from the council on that, or we just pull that?
Go ahead and get council approval on that.
Is there a motion to approve that?
I move that we pull 2.2.
I'll second.
Please vote. Okay, announcements portion of the evening.
Motion carried unanimously.
Sorry. Now we start the announcements portion of the evening, starting with Councilmember Bilbray. Any announcements? Mr. Patton?
Just a few things. May 21st, I had the opportunity with the Chamber and SC, or South County Economic Development Council. Went to a Grunion run at 9 p.m. There were 50 or 60 people there. And we had mostly kids, of course, adults. There was a controlled fire pit for s'mores. We had somebody from the Chula Vista Nature Center give us a lesson about Grunion. It was a great event. And what I really liked about it was we had this little tiny fire pit, which was legal because we were cooking something on it, apparently. But a fire pit at the Pier Plaza for things like this would be so good for our community. That's my editorial on that one. And then I went to the Sandag meeting last Friday. There's a big vote, the biggest vote I've ever done. I voted yes for a $1.35 billion budget for next year and a $900 million trolley that will go up to UTC, the Blue Line, which will be done in 2021. Purple line, bluish purple line. And there was a lot of talk about how to phrase the verbiage on a ballot issue that's going to be coming up in 75 words or less. So it was a good event. We have June 25th is a 5K here in IB also coming up. Bittistown and around IB.
Great, thank you, Mr. Patton. Councilmember Bragg?
Thank you. I did have the honor to attend the Mar Vista High School Unity Games that was sponsored by the PTA, and it was a wonderful event. They had students from every school competing in many different track and field events. The field was just packed with students, and each one of them receiving participation ribbons. And I was a guest speaker at the South Bay Students for Change. And these students have actually spoken to us at our council meeting. And the program that evening was about the social host ordinance which our city has supported. That's something that was brought forward by the California League of Cities. And these students were just really taking that message home to their families, which was extremely important and timely at this time of year when a lot of families are hosting graduation parties. And I did attend the Mar Vista Water Polo, their awards banquet 2 weeks ago, and our team, I think, were the championships for District 2. And the coaches and the families were just thrilled beyond belief at their accomplishment. And
Where was
then-
that at, by the way?
It was at the Dempsey.
Oh,
Dempsey
good.
Holder Safety Center.
Okay.
And you know me, I'm a history girl. So I gave the history on girls water polo, and that it had only been very recently that women had been allowed to compete in water polo at the Olympics. So I challenged these girls to always be trailblazers. And then with a heavy heart, I do want to announce that there is a portion of MTS that is on strike. It is the paratransit drivers. And unfortunately, these drivers drive our most vulnerable population. And that is people who use paratransit to go to maybe dialysis and life-saving appointments. First Transit, which oversees that union, has done an outstanding job about making sure that people who have life-threatening appointments are going to those appointments. We have really thought outside the box on ways to get these people to their appointments, which includes taxi cabs and Uber. So there was only, I think, 7 appointments that were not made. Those were not life-threatening appointments. Some people who use paratransit access for maybe going to the pharmacy to pick up transcriptions or prescriptions have voluntarily canceled their appointments. They are still out on strike, and we are back at the bargaining table. So I'll keep you posted on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Spriggs?
Thank you. I want to thank Councilmember Patton for being able to attend the Sandag meeting on Friday last week. Both the mayor and I were out of town, and our erstwhile alternate was able to hold up the Imperial Beach's banner. So thank you very much for that. I think that was the first time that we've neither the mayor or I have been able to attend a Sandag meeting. Tomorrow, the International Boundary and Water Commission meeting Citizens Forum is holding their meeting. It'll be at the Estuary Council Conference Room from 6 to 8 p.m. And there's several interesting and useful items on the agenda, including a detailed discussion of Treaty Minute 320, which is the minute pertaining to the River Valley cleanup and waste issues. And on Friday, I'll be doing an early morning and one-day trip to the League of California Cities Housing Community and Economic Development Committee meeting, which is in Sacramento, and also a full legislative briefing to all of the 200 or so policy committee members on the various policy committees of the League of California Cities. So I'll report back on that at our next council meeting. Thanks.
Speaking of the border, yesterday I took a tour with Chris Helmer, the city staff, Public Works Department, of the International Wastewater Treatment Plant run by the IBWC, with Steve Smullen of the IBWC and William Ostick, the new Consul General of Tijuana. So that was good. Then after that tour, we took the Consul General to Goat Canyon and Borderfield State Park to just look at some of the issues there. And very good, very good. Obviously, it's great to have Chris as the leading the city's effort to really deal with the U.S. side of the border. And really what came out of that trip is it's very clear that there are real specific tangible things that probably wouldn't cost a lot of money that can be done under minute 320. But it's very clear that the political will on both sides of the border isn't where it needs to be. And I think Imperial Beach is really pushing people to move a lot quicker. And so thank you, Councilmember Spriggs, for taking the leadership of the IBWC Citizens Commission. I know that a lot of issues you've been raising with the IBWC's response to some of the pollution issues. So even the IBWC's own staff member admitted that the IBWC could be doing a better job. So that's something we'll be pushing on and continue to push on. So the Consul General will be reporting to the State Department because they oversee the IBWC. Frankly, I'm not impressed with the IBWC's leadership. I'm not so clear that, yeah, well, that's another issue, but it's very clear that the commissioner isn't that concerned about what happens to Imperial Beach or U.S. citizens and U.S. cities that are affected by international sewage issues. So anyway, we'll all be pushing on that, I know. On June 4th at the pier this Saturday, there's a CrossFit competition, improving on competition. That's a great event, so that should be a lot of fun to watch. I want to thank the city, but more importantly, the Fleet Reserve, the American Legion, and then the VFW chapters here in Imperial Beach for hosting a really moving Memorial Day observance. There were a lot of folks there. I think they said it was one of the larger, more well-attended observances, so that was very nice. We had a commander from the Navy give a very moving speech. So again, that was a very nice event. And then I took a tour of the port yesterday of the 10th Street terminal and then the Pasha car terminal in National City. Very interesting to see that. The port staff also said that if any council member would like to do that tour, it only took an hour. We did it in car. It was a very quick tour. So that was very good. This is related to the Sandag half-cent sales tax initiative and why some environmentalists are against it, because they're talking about emissions. But it's very clear to me that if you want to deal with emissions in San Diego, you need to focus on the border. And the reality, the volume of trucks that are ingressing and egressing out of port operations is really, really impressive. And it's very clear to me, rather than focus on freeway extensions, the environmental community really needs to focus on truck traffic and this in South County. Obviously that's really where you get the volume of emissions. So it was very, very interesting tour, and obviously the port's very interested in upgrading those facilities. So anyway, that's it. Any communications from city staff? Great. So now we have presentations, and we have 1.1 presentation of proclamation recognizing the month of June as Immigrant Heritage Month. And I'll read that. No one's here from that. No. People who requested it. Great. So June 2016 is Immigrant Heritage Month, whereas generations of immigrants from every corner of the globe have built our country's economy and created a unique character of our nation. And whereas the city of Imperial Beach is a vibrant and thriving community with racial, religious, and ethnic diversity. And whereas immigrants continue to grow businesses, innovate, strengthen our economy, and create American jobs in Imperial Beach. And whereas immigrants have provided the United States with unique social and cultural influence, fundamentally enriching the extraordinary character of our nation. And whereas immigrants have been tireless leaders, not only in securing their own rights and access to equal opportunity, but have also campaigned to create a fair and more just society for all Americans. And despite these countless contributions, the role of immigrants in building and enriching our nation has frequently been overlooked and undervalued throughout our history and continuing to the present day. And whereas the city of Imperial Beach is committed to recognizing diversity of all in its residents and the diverse contributions of both immigrants and native born. Now, therefore, it be it resolved that I, Serge Dedina, Mayor of Imperial Beach, together with our city council, designate 2016 as Immigrant Heritage Month in the city of Imperial Beach, dated June 1st, 2016. Thank you. And both my parents are immigrants, and I know I was actually moving to be at Memorial Day and see all our veterans who are immigrants as well. So it's great. We have a very diverse community. So anyway, it's very nice. Oh, and I missed city comments, so I'm already blowing it. Okay, we'll go back. Any public comment?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Good. All right. Thank you. So the consent calendar, we're going to move 2.2. So I guess we'll do minutes. We'll do numbers 2.1 and 2.3. Is that correct? All right, good. I would like to entertain a motion to approve consent calendar item numbers 2.1 and 2.3. Please vote.
Motion carried unanimously.
Great, thank you. Now we have reports. This is our main issue for the evening. We have Gary Gallegos, Executive Director of Sandag, to give us informational item only presentation on the proposed half-cent sales tax measure for Sandag. Thank you, Mr. Gallegos, for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the council. Thank you for having me this evening to give you an overview of the measure that Sandag's working on to put on the ballot in November of this year. If I can get the technology to work here. So first, in terms of giving you an overview, I thought we'd kind of remind the council that in October of last year, the board of directors adopted a long-range regional plan. It's a $204 billion investment that is meant to create more transportation choices for all San Diegans throughout San Diego County. A key to that measure is the Transnet measure that's been, I think, not only part of our success in the past, but hopefully will continue to be help us succeed in the future. And to that point, I suspect the city of Imperial Beach has also experienced that dollars are harder to come by at either the state or federal level, and where it used to be that every region sort of got some fair share of federal and state dollars. What we find ourselves today is having to compete for those dollars because there's less of them, more competitors at the table. And of course, local match becomes almost a ticket to get into the competition. So without local match, you can't even get into the game to compete for dollars at the state or federal level for San Diego. So these local dollars through Transnet have really become precious. And as the board adopted this $204 billion long-range plan, the plan acknowledges when we look out to the horizon of 2050 that it did recognize that a new local funding source would be needed in order to make the plan a reality. So what you see here is sort of the two networks at 2050, both for roads and for transit. And you can see that, in both cases, I think the network into the future, as we anticipate close to 1 million more residents living in our county, that's a much more robust system, both on our road system and our transit system, with the idea of providing San Diegans more choices and more realistic ways to, get from point A to point B. So as I mentioned earlier, kind of recognizing the importance that Transnet has played in our success, as we got ready to do this, and I think a really important mantra with these sales tax measures has sort of been promises made, promises kept. What did we tell the voters in '87, and what did we tell the voters in 2004, and how have we done against what we told the voters in both of those elections? And so we took a look dating back all the way to 1988, and the region as a whole has accomplished about 650 projects throughout the region. That 650 projects has an investment of about $13 billion. About $3.3 billion of that investment has come from the local sales tax that our residents in San Diego County have paid. But we've also been successful in leveraging another $10 billion. So again, back to the theme here of needing dollars to match, but also local dollars helping us leverage more state, federal, or even in some case developer and local funds here. So $3.3 billion leveraged into about a $13 billion investment. So in an effort to better share with the public and educate, because very often, and probably an area that we haven't done that good of a job in, that we kind of finish a project and we move on to the next project, and we quite frankly haven't probably always told the story of what have we done with your dollars. And so this storybook that you see here was an effort to go back over the years dating back all the way to 1988 and highlight all 650 projects. You'll see at the top there's an overview where you can either look at highways, transit, bikeways, local street and roads, the very local projects that you guys have been able to accomplish here in Imperial Beach. And you can click on any one of the icons on our webpage, and it'll give you a whole history about, here's when the project started, here's when it ended, here's how much it cost, here's where the money came from. As an effort to, really disclose, where those 650 projects are. And if you were to tally them all up, that's how you get to the $13 billion. And so this is live on our webpage, and we're encouraging, residents to, take a look at that, help get an understanding of exactly where their money has been invested over the last couple of decades. Outreach, as the board started down this path of, going back to the voters, doing outreach to help shape a measure that might go for the voters was very important. So we've done, at the direction of the board, a pretty extensive outreach. And look, I've been in this business for 30 some years, and I would share with the council here tonight that this is probably some of the most extensive outreach we've done. We've used postcards, social media, probably a whole new environment for us in terms of how you communicate with many of our residents, particularly our younger millennials that would rather, and I have millennials as kids, and I have a better chance of texting them than I do calling them and talking to them, right? If I call, say my chances, my daughter taking my call are 1 in 10. If I text, the chances flip, right? I got like a 9 in 10 chance that she will text me right back. So how we use social media, how we use e-blasts, videos, and so just how we do outreach, I think has changed, I think for the best, because we can definitely have new tools to get out and communicate more through social media piece, which is exciting as we look to the future. And one of the things we did that was a little different, we did these electronic town hall meetings, and we did 4 of them, 3 in English, kind of spread out through different parts of the county, 1 in Spanish for our Spanish speaking population of the county. They're live. It's like one big phone conference. So we had 13,600 people that participated in these telephone interviews or town hall meetings. We got to answer direct questions. So I learned, and we learned from, so we call him Joe, the bathroom guy from National City, that said, look, all I want on the transit system is better bathrooms, right? So I can, us old guys got to go to the bathroom. And we heard from somebody in Oceanside that said, fix my pothole. Or we heard from somebody in Imperial Beach that, make our streets, pave them and fix our streets. And so we're talking to live residents, which often we don't see in our traditional public meetings. We tend to see the same folks that come to the meetings and tell us important stuff, but we don't always get to talk to the everyday San Diegan that probably doesn't have the time to come down to one of our public meetings. And so we use these town hall meetings as a way to outreach directly to residents in San Diego County. And I got to tell you, there was a lot of good input we got. So there's the staff, people like myself and our planning directors and others that were there, but our board members were there too. So Chairman Roberts led most of these town hall meetings, and it's probably some of the most extensive public outreach that we've done, or that I've done in my 30-some years of working in this business, where we were actually able to talk to people that we may not always see. We answered questions live. We used voicemails, and so everybody that asked a question got a response. And the feedback we've gotten from these town hall meetings was that they were pretty effective. And they're to the extent that Imperial County or Imperial Beach is, you guys look to doing outreach, I would just share that for us, this was a very positive experience to be able to reach, broad sector of the San Diego region. Maybe a little easier in Imperial Beach because you're a little smaller, and I have had the opportunity to come and have breakfast on the beach and be able to talk to lots of folks here in Imperial Beach, but that may not always be the case in a city that's as big as the city of San Diego, as an example. So this was an opportunity for us that I think yielded us some really good results, and the board has used this information to help shape the measure that is scheduled to go to the voters in November. One other thing we've done, and I know Mayor Deldina and Mayor Pro Tem Spriggs have participated in some of the retreat. I think Councilmember Bragg may have also been at some of these. But sometimes when we start working on these things, it's not unusual that our board members, your mayor comes from Imperial Beach to sit on the regional board, and we tend to sort of be parochial about, well, what's in it for my city. And I think what we try to do, and what I'm about to share, is that the transportation system that we so rely on every day is really a regional system. And, for starters, there's about 3 million work trips that get done every day. And we have about 1.4 million residents making those 3 million work trips every day. And this is data that comes right out of the census, by the way. But what we learned in this exercise and shared with our board, and actually this has resonated pretty well with some of the media and others, is that only about 30% of the residents in these sub areas, as we broke the region into different sub areas, only about a third of them actually live or work in the sub area they live. So almost 70% leave that sub area and they travel someplace else. And the reason I think this is important because it really speaks to the regional system. You know, an investment that's being made on the blue line, for example, may not, you know, directly affect Imperial Beach, but may indirectly affect a lot of your residents because they may be using that to get to their place of employment, or an improvement that we make on a road someplace might not only affect the people that live around that road, but might affect, you know, the citizens that use that as a whole. And I wanted to highlight, because we also took a focus at, in this case, South County, and I wanted to share the number for South County here. And so as you see in South County, there's, we think about 148,000 resident workers each day in South County. And about 74%, a little higher than the average of 69, commute outside of South County. And you can see the arrows there. Probably the two biggest ones are downtown and what we call the Golden Triangle in Sorrento Valley, which are the region's first and second largest employment centers. So a real connection between South County and the job centers. But it's even beyond that. You'll see that there's about 2% that travel all the way up to North County into the employment centers in Carlsbad and Oceanside. So again, hopefully the takeaway here is that this is a pretty regional system. We also looked at this in reverse. So we looked at, all right, there's about 85,000 jobs in South County. Well, about 38,000 or 45% of those are filled by people that live in South County. But you got 47,000 people, or almost 55%, that are coming to South County to work. And so you can see that, they come from all over the region. And example I would share with the council of a phenomena that's, and this idea that you can exactly plan, where you're going to put a house right next to where people work. And the fact that, people live complicated lives. And you look at downtown San Diego, if we were to, backtrack 10 or 20 years, there weren't that many people living in downtown. And I think our downtown in San Diego has gone through a dramatic change where today there's about 30,000 residents that call downtown home today. And you'd think, well, downtown's like the second largest employment center in the region. So many of those folks hopefully are living in downtown and they're working in downtown. Well, wrong. That's not necessarily, that's not the case. That's not what we're experiencing. That there's a lot of people living downtown that are still working in Sorrento Valley. So the mid-coast trolley line that we're about to hopefully start construction on, later this year is a good example of hopefully another tool in giving people more choices, because we're finding that in downtown, 20 or 30 years ago, it was a migration of workers coming into downtown. And the reality we're seeing today is that, that's still happening from other parts of the region. But at the same time, there's a migration out of downtown, either going to Sorrento Valley or in some cases, South County for jobs. So the transportation system is hopefully what you'll take out of this. It's a pretty regional system. And even if, you don't see a individual investment in your city, but you see stuff happening around your city that, your residents may be actually benefiting from that. So this chart here, this bar chart, kind of tells you a story of all those subregions. I focused on South County since we were in Imperial Beach tonight, but you'll see that North City, which is sort of the Golden Triangle area, is the only area that comes close to, matching the number of workers with the number of jobs. In most cases, people are migrating out of one sub area into another area in order to reach their locations of employment. So in April of this year, the board of directors approved a measure to develop a funding measure that would be placed on the November 16th ballot. And they directed staff to prepare an expenditure plan and an ordinance that would support the ballot that the board wants to put on the ballot. And so since April, we've been hard at work at putting that expenditure plan together. And I thought I'd cover just a little bit first by starting at where Sandag has authority through our legislative authority to spend tax dollars. And that's always a real question, particularly when we work with our local governments. Well, if we give the city of Imperial Beach as an example in Transnet, your local street roads money can be used for local street and roads, but it couldn't be used to pay down your retirement fund. It couldn't be used to, do other things that the city may want or desire to do. And so as our board was encouraging us in terms of putting this expenditure plan, is looking at the needs that our local government has, not only looking at the needs that the region has, but being respectful of the fact that all 18 cities in the county have unique needs that are unique to their individual cities. The direction we got from the board is, how can we make the dollars as flexible? And so we started by first looking at what are we authorized to spend those dollars for? And they're in the area of transportation, habitat preservation, water quality improvements, and beach sand replenishment. So those are the four sort of legislative areas that Sandag would be able to spend money for a ballot initiative that we would put on the ballot. So with that in mind, the board's been working on this draft expenditure plan. They're looking at a half cent over a 40-year period that would generate about $18 billion in sort of constant current 2016 dollars. And you'll see the way this breaks out, the first $192 million to represent about 1.1%. About 1% of that would be for administration of the program, and the 0.1% would be for the Independent Taxpayer Oversight Committee that would provide independent oversight on these expenditures, as we're doing with our current Transnet measure. Active transportation under this expenditure plan would get about $540 million over that 40-year period, representing about 3% of the measure. And so what this active transportation piece would do, and I know the mayor's been a huge fan of expanding our bicycle network and particularly getting it to connect with what's happening at the border. The board adopted a regional bike and ped plan a few years ago, and this would kind of help fund most of that, and in essence double the investment we're making on bike and ped right now. So we're spending about 3% out of the current Transnet measure. This other 3% would in essence double that and help the region fulfill the plan that they've adopted. Open space, which is really one of the reasons that we're even here in terms of when Transnet was passed in 2004, there was a commitment to go back to the voters on the issue of open space. And back in that time, there was a pretty big debate as the extension was moving forward, whether it was a transportation measure with environmental enhancements or an environmental measure with transportation enhancements. And eventually the conclusion was that it was a transportation measure with environmental enhancements, but the board also made a commitment to come and act on another measure to help meet the requirements that many of our cities had entered into when they did multiple species conservation planning and the permits that are tied to those. So a lot of folks sometimes, because a lot of the institutional memory, I mean, if you think about who some of the elected officials were back when the MSCP was starting, I'm going to go back and say that, it's probably a Mayor Bixler in the city of Imperial Beach, and it was a Mayor Golding in the city of San Diego. So, it dates us back a few years. And so in that conservation planning, there was a requirement that as they streamline the process for getting permits and figuring out, where you're going to develop and where you're going to preserve land, that, the preserve had to be put in place. But then also, if we're going to have a preserve and we're going to own land, but it's got to be managed, because you can't just, put a fence around it and say we're done and walk away. And so the management piece was a requirement that all our cities that had conservation plans kind of bought into in terms of a long-term funding plan for managing that. This is what attempts to do that. And this is what would attempt to, in essence, fulfill a requirement that many of our cities bought into when they started their conservation planning. But I would add one element that I think is really important in this. And again, maybe not so important for Imperial Beach, but I think important for the region as a whole, is the region in the past decade has, experienced in 2003 and 2007 wildfires. And so the idea here is that these dollars, in terms of managing the preserve, would also be used to manage the preserve with the idea of also protecting the preserve and making it healthy in terms of managing it in a way that would help reduce the risk for wildfires, which would probably be pretty important, particularly for our residents that live in the backcountry, but probably for all of San Diego. And so that's what that open space is proposing to do, about $2 billion, totaling about 11.1% of the measure, and fulfilling sort of that requirement, that commitment that our cities made and that Sandag made on acting on a measure to go before the voters to try to preserve and put in place a funding mechanism for our open space. Number 5 there is highways, managed lanes, and connectors. And there's, as the mayor has maybe shared with the council, but a tug on, some people want like all roads and no transit, and other people want all transit and no roads. And in a county like San Diego, and as diverse as we are, at a 2/3 voter threshold, you probably can't win at either extreme. So if we said, hey, we're going to make it all transit, we lose. We said we're going to make it all roads, we lose. And so what this is trying to do is bring that balance. And even though that 14.2% or a little over $2.5 billion looks like a small amount, but what hopefully will be understood here is that also then leverages the other dollars you have. So it gets projects that are right now on the books, done. And it doesn't propose to add any new toll greenfield roads, but it's about widening and making the roads we already have better. So as an example of something in South County that would, I think, benefit Imperial Beach would be adding HOV managed lanes on I-5, whereby then we would be able to put express buses to complement the trolley line to make travel much shorter between downtown San Diego and the border, if we could make this work. But the express buses don't work if you're putting the express buses into a Interstate 5 that's already pretty crowded. And so this is a dilemma in South County, for example, where folks that say, well, don't really need more roads. We just, convert one of the lanes you have there and put the buses on that. But, I just had the privilege and the honor of traveling down Interstate 5 and asked my assistant, who's a very proud Imperial Beach resident, Tessa Lero, should I take the 5 or should I go through Coronado? And she said, I think you should take the 5 this time of the day because it moves. And, it wasn't a bad trip here, but, the freeway was pretty crowded coming here this afternoon as I got into that 5 o'clock commute peak period. And it was arguably that facility was pretty well used in the last hour with not a lot of extra space to add express buses sitting place and make them express. So that's one of the dilemmas we have and how the highway and managed lane piece would work. It would complement other dollars we have to make the investments, to make the road improvements work. So even though it's a small amount, what's important is that it leverages other dollars and it allows us to do broad things around the county. So way out of the county, for example, there's probably 2 projects in our research that we've done that have just resonated every time. 78 North County and 78, they're the answers to put more lanes. But in South County, it's been a new trolley line, a new purple line that would provide better access. Because right now, even though many of our South County residents, may be wanting to go to San Diego State or they may be wanting to go to other employment areas, right now, if they're using transit and they're using light rail, you got to go downtown. So you got to go north in order to go to the east. And so the purple line would sort of bypass downtown, give many of our South Bay residents a much more direct access to the employment centers at Sereno Valley and Kearney Mesa and other places like that. So those 2 projects, every time we've done research, kind of have risen to the top, and a measure like this tries to accomplish both of those. On the transit side, and we hear very often that, not enough's being spent for transit. This is a pretty aggressive transit measure. The first proposal that the staff put on the table was a little bit more aggressive than this. But we got pushback from the board. I think the mayor will remember at the retreat, we had that number right around 50%, a little over that. And we got really strong direction from the board that, it needed to be a little bit more balanced. And so this is where the board's at today. About $7.5 billion would be spent on public transportation. And it would, generate about 41, almost 42% of the measure. One of the challenges we have on the transit side, but an area that I would share with the council that we've tried to hopefully display some fiscal responsibility, is that if you're going to build these transit systems, we need to be able to operate them. And we're pretty proud of the transit system that we have in San Diego County. And in terms of what we generate out of fares, we probably do better than most regions around the country. Our fare box recovery is right around 40%, a little less than 40%. Or if you went to most other transit properties around the country, that number would be in the teens or maybe the low 20%. But that still means that for every dollar of cost that we have, we're going to recover about 40 cents through fares, but we're going to have to subsidize it with another 60 cents to make it work. And so every one of the transit pieces that are proposed as new transit pieces here, we've tried to capitalize the operations piece. And that way that's why you'll see that, about 26% of that is, about $4.7 billion is in new capital stuff. The biggest of that being this purple line that overall is about a $4 billion light rail line. But about 2.1 billion of that over that 40 years is necessary just to make sure that we have money to be able to run the buses and the trains if indeed we're going to build it. We've also included about 3%, another $540 million for specialized transit grants. And these are grants to help with seniors, with military, with disabled folks. The last direction we got from the board is there some money in here, and councils would be able to make that choice on a council by council basis for youth opportunity passes. That's something that we've heard, I think, a loud voice at Sandag, but not everybody. And the good or bad of Sandag is, I think a past mayor said, is the good news is we're all here, or the bad news is we're all here, because all 18 cities are at the table at Sandag. And not everybody's in the same position in terms of youth pass. But these dollars would help allow us to tailor programs to different parts of the region that might work differently, so that instead of trying to have a one size fits all for youth opportunity passes, this would allow us to do some tailoring along with the local funds. And then last but not least, I want to get to the local formula funds. This was something that in our multi-year development of this plan, we have heard only through your city managers. And I understand Manager Hall's celebrating the wedding of his daughter. And but I get to work with them closely through the City Managers Association, and through our board. We've heard, all right, look, our cities are also hurting in terms of the infrastructure needs that all the cities have. And so this measure would provide about $4.3 billion for about 24%. And for Imperial Beach, it would mean about 667,000 extra on your first year, and forget the number, $3 or $4 million over the life of the program. So it's in essence like taking your local street and road money you have today and augmenting it by about 93%. So we think it would give cities a boost. And the idea back to that area of habitat planning and water quality and transportation and shoreline protection, that we're trying to make those dollars as flexible, so that in a city like Imperial Beach, if protecting your beach and putting sand on the beach might be more important than it might be to El Cajon, you guys would have the flexibility to do that, but El Cajon would have the flexibility to make things work for them. And so that's the local program. Those would be dollars that would come directly to the locals. How those dollars, the formula that the board's adopted to this point, every city would start out with a base of $100,000 per year. So that ensures that the big and the little guys don't get left out if it's all percentage wise, right? So there's some base amount that every city would get $100,000 a year. And then everything above that then would be split on a population basis. So that's how Imperial Beaches, formula would work and everybody else's. Two other pieces that we've gotten a fair amount of feedback that not necessarily a local program, because not every local jurisdiction might benefit from this, but they're programs or grant programs that are targeted towards local one. And now I'm actually, let me start with number 8, the first one, and that's signal synchronization. There's probably not San Diegan in San Diego that hasn't had an experience where you're sitting at a signal light and it's red for you, and it's green in the other direction, and there's nobody going through the intersection, and you're sitting there waiting, causing air pollution, doing other things, not being able to utilize your time as you would like. And so this program is geared up as a grant program that instead of, one might argue, well, the cities could be synchronizing their signals, but they haven't, not all of them. And I think it's not because they don't care about it, but there's just so many challenges that maybe doesn't rise to the top. Well, by making this a grant program, we could make this help it rise to the top and help cities throughout San Diego County to synchronize their signals. And I would share with the council that this is probably one of the lowest hanging pieces of fruit that would actually make a huge improvement in our mobility system and in our environment. If we could, just make our signal system a heck of a lot smarter than it is today. We believe the technology's there, and a grant program like this would help put San Diego on a path towards hopefully most of our cities trying to synchronize their system. And then the last program, representing about $900 million for about 5% of the measure, and that's another grant program to focus on grade separations. And the board has spent a fair amount of time debating, talking about grade separations in past plans. But in the past, the share has been such that cities needed to come up with a big chunk of the money, and they just didn't have it. So consequently, we haven't really made a lot of progress on grade separations. But as we try, for example, in South County, to increase more frequency on the blue line, well, that comes at a cost from some of the surface streets where now the gate times will be, gates will be down longer because there's more trains going through there. And so this program's meant to make about $1 billion investment in separating key grade crossings throughout the region. And we got a bunch of them in South County. Probably most of those are in the Chula Vista area. But we got some in downtown, and then we got some up north on the coastal rail corridor. We got some on the Sprinter rail corridor going down to 78. And then we got some on the Orange line that goes, through Lemon Grove and El Cajon. And so that's what we would do with those dollars if voters were to approve this measure. And that gives you a picture of the overall expenditure. Here's a pictorial picture of that, so you can see that investments are kind of trying to be spread around the entire region. At the end of the day, we need 2 out of every 3 voters to be able to say yes to something like this. In that, and we, last time we adopted a measure, and then after the measure was adopted, the board adopted an early action program that I think we've been pretty successful in building lots of projects. This time, the board said, no, we, every region of the county had a reason to know, they wanted to make sure that their project's going to be a priority. So we didn't have the benefit of passing a measure and then coming back and doing a program. The board said we need to know what's going to be a priority up front. So we developed what we call a priority corridor program, which is kind of like an early action program, but we called it something different to not confuse it with a Transnet program that's already in place today, called an early action program. And what you see here are the projects that are in that early action program. They're again spread throughout the county and different parts of the county. What's here is sort of a bullet piece of those. And the only thing that's a little complicated with this bullet piece that I want to highlight, so you're focused in South County. And let me first start about South County and then tell you what's a little awkward that doesn't show up in South County. So in South County, we start with I-5, these managed lines, and those will support the 640 rapid bus lines that go from San Ysidro to downtown, Old Town, and Kearny Mesa. those are the bus lines that would literally cut the travel time by, 20, 30 minutes during the peak periods. But can't get those 640 buses to run if we don't have, dedicated, lane to put them in. And so the I-5 corridor would do that. Trolley service enhancements are also shown here. We're talking about running 7.5-minute trolleys pretty much all day and extending the service on the weekend. And those would be done pretty much as the measure was passed, because those don't require new equipment. It would provide more money to MTS to be able to run the equipment they have and just provide, peak service, throughout the day. We are proposing in the priority corridors program here a rapid bus line that would be done early, and that's tying the border crossing at San Ysidro and the border crossing at Otay. There's a bus line that goes through there today that's already pretty crowded, and this would really enhance that and make it a rapid bus line. And then what's left out of this that really has a component for South County, but so the way we listed these, we listed it in the central corridor because it's a 22-mile light rail line called the Purple Line. And that's the light rail line that would start roughly in San Ysidro. We think traverse somewhere generally along the 805, transition to the 15 and go through Mid-City, make a connection with Qualcomm, across Mission Valley at Qualcomm, and make a connection with Qualcomm, regardless of what happens, whether that area gets redeveloped or whatever happens with it. It would have another north-south transit connection. It's got an east-west one, but it doesn't have, this would be a new north-south one. The trolley line would then continue into the employment center at Kearney Mesa, which is pretty important employment center for the region, and one that's served generally okay with buses today, but not with light rail. So this would put light rail into the Kearney Mesa area, and then from there it would generally go along the 52 back into Sereno Valley and connect connect with the major employment centers in Sereno Valley. And so, even though that purple line's not listed in the south corridor, because of the fact that it's 20-some miles long and it runs through most of a big chunk of the county, it's not listed. But those are the projects that would be in South County. One of the things that the board talked about extensively in the ordinance changes we're bringing, not only did they want to establish this priority corridor, but they also wanted to, for lack of better words, lockbox these investments, so that the only way they could be changed is if they would go back to the voters. And I think the key piece in this, though, and I want to emphasize this because I know the mayor heard a fairly extensive discussion about this, is what you're lockboxing are the funds. Because the idea here is that the measure is not, thank you. The idea is that the measure is not a decision-making measure in terms of the project itself. It's a decision on funding, right? And that becomes important in terms of how you deal with CEQA, so that the board wouldn't be making any project decisions. Every one of these projects would still have to go through its complete CEQA review, looking at an alternative analysis to be able to get there. But what the board's asking for, though, is that the funding for these would be locked in place, so that the only way it could get changed, a future board can come in and say, I want to change it. What could be changed is to go back to the voters. So that's a provision that's a little bit different than we've seen in the past, that I think represents where the board's at on this. So let me wrap up by what we've spent some work trying to figure out what the economic benefits of this are. And so we believe that a measure like this would generate somewhere between 7,000 to 12,000 jobs over a 40-year period. And as I talk about that, I also want to share with the council here that the other strong provision that the board's asking us to try to incorporate into the measure is, to the extent possible, to be able to hire San Diego workers to work on these projects. So there's a local hire requirement that we're trying to incorporate into the ordinance. It would add somewhere between $1 to $1.75 billion to the regional economy. So over the life of the measure, it would contribute somewhere between 45 to 71 billion dollars to the regional economy. Would add somewhere between 20 to 32 billion in salaries. And for every dollar we invest in this measure, assuming the matches we're going to get, we would get somewhere between 240 to 250 to $4 back. in that sense, having a pretty positive benefit to cost ratio in terms of people that are trying to look at that BC. And so in terms of where we're at today, again, the board made the decision to move forward in April. We first debuted the draft expenditure plan that I shared with you on May 13th. The board continued that discussion, making tweaks on it on the 27th. We're scheduled to come back to the board a week from tomorrow on June 10th for more discussion, with the idea that the first reading of the ordinance then would be done on the 24th of June, with the second reading to follow a couple of weeks after that on July 8th. And that's on July 8th when the board would take an action, for the final action to put this on the ballot. And at that point, we would send the language to the County Board of Supervisors. One thing that want to share with the council here is the action of going to the supervisors. It's an administrative action, not a discretionary action. So the supervisors, if indeed the Sandag board sent it to them, they would have to vote to put it on the ballot as an ministerial action, not a discretionary action. And if all that happens, then we would go to the voters on November 8th of this year. And so, Mayor and council members, that's kind of where we're at in terms of the overview, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you for the
Gallegos.
water.
We appreciate that overview. Mr. Spriggs, comments and then questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation, and it's really been a pleasure participating in some of the board deliberations on this and seeing the dynamics between the various proponents of different approaches to solving the region's transit and transportation challenges. I don't envy your position being in the middle of all of that, fur flying around all the time. I think we should also, in addition to the economic benefits, which are obvious, if people and goods can move around more efficiently, there's obviously going to be economic gains compared to the losses that gridlock produces. But there's another thing, and that's the quality of life improvements when people are able to move around with less stress and less time spent dealing with the commute, and more quality time for being at home or being at work or in between. And I would hope that we would emphasize these qualitative benefits when this measure is in the process of being promoted to the voters as well. And we have to figure out what those are and provide examples, because it's not all dollars and cents. It's very important to justify the sales tax increase, but it's also, I think, important in terms of the quality of life, because San Diegans really value that very highly. Certainly our folks here in Imperial Beach do. I really only had two quick questions after that comment. One is, on one of your earlier slides, there's an indication of a rapid transit link from it looks like the Palm Avenue trolley station down Palm Avenue to the beach, which is something that I've certainly advocated for, and other council members as well, and Councilmember Bragg, who's on the MTS board. Do you have any thoughts as to when that is going to actually happen? Because that can alleviate a lot of the traffic concerns if we can get more people to use public transportation rather than try to park near the beach in Imperial Beach. And the second question is, how is signal synchronization going to be rolled out? We certainly have big issues here. State 75, which serves multi-jurisdictions as well as the Navy, is a huge issue for us in terms of bottlenecks at rush hour, both directions. So a sense as to when and how that's going to roll out, and whether it's going to be by corridor or by jurisdiction or whatever would be helpful, if if you
So
have that.
if I can try to answer your questions maybe in reverse, last one first, and then I'll get back to the first question. At least the sort of tried and true method that has worked in many programs that Sandag has laid out is that should a measure pass, then the board would establish, because this is a grant program, so it would establish evaluation criteria, sort of, what are the rules of the game before the game starts. And then we would put a call for projects out, and in that call for projects, we would encourage cities to work together and bring proposals forward. And like we've done with active transportation, where we can't get to all of them, but because we have evaluation criteria, the evaluation criteria has helped the board and the region make prioritize those decisions to hopefully, the ones that are depending on the criteria that's been established would be hopefully yielding the absolute best projects. And so the idea, I think, today is that it would be a grant program like other grant programs. And typically what we've done with those grant programs is, we've had calls for projects about every 2 years. So if a particular jurisdiction is not successful in year one, well, then they have an opportunity to come back in year, 3 and year 5, and, about every 2 years, we've had a call for projects. We've also used that opportunity for cities, and I know Imperial Beach has been successful in a series of smart growth grants that you've applied for. And you haven't always been successful on the first year, right? And we've worked with your staff and said, well, look, here's how the criteria work. Here's where you ranked well. Here's where you maybe didn't rank so well, and work with your city so that in the next go around, if you understand what the rules of the game are, well, then you might, be able to adjust or tailor your project in a way that's going to hopefully achieve the most points and still produce a really good project for a given city. So, Mayor Pro Tem, that's how I think this program would roll out. It'd be through a grant program, and over that, hopefully over a 40-year period, we get most of the region. But that's been sort of the tried true way of figuring out how to do this in a systematic way.
I'm sorry, I guess
Okay.
the exact point of that question was multi-jurisdictional. We got Coronado, Imperial Beach, and San Diego all share, just as an example. I'm not trying to push that to the top, but sharing the same route and suffering in the same way from the lack of synchronization and the lack of through movement. And it hits home here where we have probably the longest stretch and the highest population along Route 75, and a lot of our business community as well. Is that sort of, that is truly a Sandag multi-jurisdictional
Well, so
issue.
we haven't established the criteria, so I'm suggesting that we'd go through a criteria setting process of where, the board members through its committee structure would ultimately adopt criteria. And so, using a hypothetical in the case you're suggesting, well, there may be more points if it's a multi-jurisdictional. Maybe there's more points if it's on a roadway, because I'm hoping that eventually that's your street, not the state of California's street, and may give you a degree of flexibility you may not have today. But to the extent, maybe it could be on ADT. I mean, we just haven't gotten to the point where we've established the criteria, but the tried true way that has worked pretty well at Sandag has been for the board to deliberate what that criteria should be. And it ought to be both qualitative and quantitative criteria that can be measured, so that then when the proposals come forward, that they come forward, that we can evaluate which are the best ones, and hopefully get to as many projects as the dollars will allow us to get to. Now, my experience of past has been that, if we look at active transportation, we did start out with local dollars, local meaning Transnet dollars, to get active transportation pieces. And that's been a good catalyst to allow us to compete for more state and federal dollars. And so we've been able to grow those pies. So maybe they'll grow that way. And I personally think it'd be a really good idea if Coronado, Imperial Beach, and City of San Diego all came together with a good plan that you guys can all live together that works for all of you. And I would guess, having watched the board over the years, that you work that into the criteria. So there's some extra points that you get for that sort of cooperation amongst jurisdictions. But we haven't gotten to that point. That would be the piece that would be set in the criteria once a measure would pass. And that would be the Liberty process, so that everybody knows what the rule of the game is. And the other thing, Mayor Pro Tem, that I would share, that our history has been that we learn from the programs that we put out. So the board hasn't just adopted criteria and then that criteria stays in place for 40 years because the rules are bad and I'm never going to win this game. So every time there's a new call for projects, one of the first things we go back and sort of what are the lessons learned, and do we need to tweak the criteria in any way? And I would share that over the years, the board members have gotten more engaged in that criteria because it's really the driver for what gets the best projects. And so I think we have a history of being able to do that. And the expectation is for a program like this, it would hopefully work that way, so that we'd have some very deliberate process to set up the criteria, a call for projects, and then every so many years more calls for projects so that we can get good projects the whole time. And then to your second question, I think that line you're referring to is probably in the long range plan, the first two maps I put up. And I can get back to you because in that plan, there's at least a targeted date of when a route like that. And off the top of my head, I do not know that, but I'd be glad to research that and get back to you and tell you when at least we anticipate that line could come on board. Thank you, sir. We just got to take, what other 6 words do you want to take out, right? And, the other thing we learned in working with the registrar's office is in past ballots, if you look at the ballot that the voters acted on in 2004, the registrar used to allow bullets, right? So that way, if, somebody went into the ballot box, it's probably easier to get down to, well, what are the bullets? What's the meat and potatoes here? Well, unfortunately, we can't do bullets no more, right? So it's got to be a paragraph now, and apparently they're concerned about just the size of the ballot. But these are the most hotly debated 75 words, and at our last meeting, we're trying to squeeze it all in and still hopefully be pretty true to what we're asking the voters for. And there's a big debate on, I think Councilmember Lori Zaff from San Diego said, what's like label? Well, if sugar's the highest ingredient, where you put that? And I think she was alluding to, well, why is in transit first? And the problem with this stuff is it's how do you want to dice it and cut it up? So if you take the 24%, if you're a city that believes in roads, you could spend all 24% of your money on roads, right? And we're going to put 5%, or you're going to add 14% for the other highways. So that gets you to 38%. And then you add 1% for signal synchronization, gets you to 39%. And if you add 5% for grade separations, well, that gets you to 44%, right? So that number's bigger than 41% on transit. And so, I mean, I think there's the board, I think is, you know, honestly having a good debate about what they think, you know, how you're the most honest with the voters. But we only get 75 words, right? So we got to figure out how to do that. And so we've tried to test those. I would share with the council that this week we got sort of a nasty email from the San Diego Taxpayer Association that thought we were campaigning for the measure and we should stop doing polling on the measure. And of course, my argument is, you know, the board still hasn't settled on which 75 words they're going to ask the voters to vote on. So we're trying to help shape that with information that will come back to the board so that they can make sort of an educated decision on what's the right 75 words that reflects what we're trying to do, and has the best chance of winning in November. Right. But remember, if you want 6, you got to take out 6, right? Because we're down to 75, right? Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary, for coming down here this afternoon and traveling down the 5. And, you know, between 3:30 and 6:30, it can be, you know, cheek to jowl, let's say.
It's good for me. I mean, the North County guys do that all the time, right? They invite us to a meeting on the 78 right before the traffic gets heavy, right? So it's good for us to experience that.
It is. It is. And, you know, while you were speaking, I was thinking, you know, how Ed said it as well, that each jurisdiction that you go to, I mean, you've got, you know, your spiel here, but you really do have to pull out, you know, what's important to each county or each city. Here in the South Bay, little city Imperial Beach, you know, the blue line does not run through our city, but certainly, and you talked about it, and it's been proven that ridership in the South Bay is huge.
Yep.
Whether it's National City, Chula Vista, or Imperial Beach, and extending on down to the border. And I do serve on MTS, so I'm the transportation girl. So when I saw, you know, 41%, I'm like, darn, you know, if it was up around 80%, I'd be happy. As what I think my other colleagues in the South Bay, and, you know, Mayor Salas and I, and we often talk about that at MTS, and how transformational, you know, the increases in transit in the South Bay can be, leading on up to the employment center. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of your slides,
Okay.
maybe have some comments. But Gary, I really did appreciate the mantra that Sandag has adopted, you know, promises made and promises kept. And I think that's extremely important that we portray that to the voters. Because if we don't, you know, this measure may not pass. And the other thing that I think we have achieved is equality in the region. And by having now this hybrid plan that, you know, addresses the issues that we heard from around the table at Sandag. So, and then in one of your slides also, I think it was on slide number 5, and there was a component there that talked about the creation of jobs. There, it was one of the very first thing. And I had the opportunity to go to Washington with Chairman Roberts and also Paul Jablonski and Sharon Cooney, and we had talked to our delegates, and each senator asked us, because we were talking about, you know, asking for different projects regarding the FAST Act, and each one of them asked us, how many jobs is this going to create? So that that you've put that in there, I think is key. And I'm not sure if that's in the ballot measure, if there's any language about that, but as we're out and about with our advocacy for voters to approve this, I think it's huge. That's one of the things that's got to be right up at the top, front and center, that people realize that, and that you're focusing on San Diego employees is.
Yeah,
I think
that
that's really
stuff's
gonna-
in the ordinance itself. And,
Okay.
you know, to that point, I mean, I think it's important, and I think the mayor helped set the tone for this evening, is that, you know, our piece is about putting the plan together and educating about what's in the plan. You can't advocate. So a campaign will have to be put together to do the advocacy piece. But ours will be one about educating what's in it.
Okay.
And so, you know, so we're endeavoring to put all the data together, but from an educational perspective, not from an advocacy perspective.
So in that data that you're going to prepare for us, will there be information that we can pass on to our voters here, especially about transit Because you would very well know that out of the top 10 bus routes, 5 of those are in the South Bay.
Mhm.
And the Blue Line is the workhorse of our system. So by being able to tell people, we just recently had gone to the 7 minutes, that if that could be extended throughout the day, and that would include security on those lines as well, which is huge.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's, and one of the challenges is maybe a little easier on the Blue Line when it's about extending service, but we're endeavoring with direction from the board, because everybody wants to know exactly when am I going to get my project. Just like the Mayor Pro Tem says, well, when's that red line that's coming all the way to IB, when's it going to be in place? And we're endeavoring, to try to give, without, because back to promises made, promises kept. I don't want to come here and tell you, well, I can get that blue line done or that purple line done in 5 years, when we know that that's probably not the case. Because on some of these projects, there are different phases in the project development. Some of them, they've got all their environmental clearances, but if there's an area that's probably the most uncertain in terms of time anyway, this is the environmental area. And in some cases, it can be decades before you get an environmental document. I mean, we spent well over a decade and 70 some million dollars getting the environmental document to expand Interstate 5 in the north part of the county. Tough document. Look, and I'm not saying that I'm not trying to beat up on the environmental process. I think it's a good process, but it takes time to get through it, because you had to do the studies, you had to go to the communities, you had to understand impacts. And in the case of I-5, we went over a bunch of very sensitive lagoons about how do we deal with the bridges on the lagoons, and how do you deal with the plants that you're impacting, and what do you do about sound, and what do you do about visual. And so the purple line, as good, I mean, I would argue that if we had the purple line today, it would be a very successful line. But when it comes down to, and maybe not so much for Imperial Beach, but when it comes down to Chula Vista and National City, and we're talking about what street we're going to go down, or if we're going to go down the street, or if we're going to go down on the freeway, and how do you get access through, and the impacts that these big public works projects have on communities. And we're about to experience that. I've been reminding Chairman Roberts that you wait till we start, you wait till and we're about to show up with all the bulldozers and the big stuff that we use to build projects. And I can tell you, because I'm really a structural engineer. I spent the early part of my career building bridges. So I've been out in the field building these. And you wait till we come down Genesee and UTC, where all the high-tech communities are. And we're going to be there for 2 or 3 years, building what's probably pretty important light rail line, but it's going to get ugly while we're building it, because we're going to come in there and we're going to impact that community. We're going to dig up their streets. We're going to pound piles. We're going to pour concrete. It's going to be noisy. It's going to be dusty. And we're going to try to do everything we can to try to minimize the impacts, but there's no sugarcoating this, man. It's, it's just like remodeling your house, man. I'm going through that right now, and it's ugly, and then it gets better at the end. And so that's a challenge with every one of these projects, and we're endeavoring with all the priority projects to try to be able to share, what we think are realistic timeframes. But the environmental process, well, a good process in terms of getting us to, hopefully the best project with greatest public good, least private harm, least environmental harm. But it takes time to get through all these. And so that's the area that's probably the most uncertain for us in terms of just, working with the regulatory agencies just to get permits.
All right, thank you. On slide number 18, and it was the one that had the South Corridor projects on it. Hang on a second. Again, I just wanted to, here it is, slide 18, and then I'm going to go to slide 15, and whichever one you come to first. I just wanted to, reiterate that the rapid services that MTS is installing and initiating here in the South Bay are huge, tremendous success stories, tremendous, beyond our wildest dreams. So I see those as the wave of the future. And, so that's why, to me, the transportation component of this plan is so important, because it really does help move people here in the South Bay. So of course, I'm always pushing for those. And then on slide 15, and Mr. Spriggs had talked about that synchronization grant, that one, you know, you're kind of singing to the choir down here, but I was kind of hearing what you were saying, and that perhaps there could be or should be a collaborative effort between Coronado, Imperial Beach, and the city of San Diego.
Look, I think at the end of the day, it's, you know, what's going to give you the best project. And if that's the best project, and unfortunately, we got to pass this first, I guess, but then the next piece would be to set up the criteria, right? And so I would encourage the mayor and through the council to stay engaged in the criteria, to, you know, try to have criteria that hopefully will allow you to be the most competitive. But that's been sort of the tried and true way for Sandag, is to, you know, because, you know, this is a 40-year measure, so we don't have every dollar on day one, right? So we're going to have to meter it out over some period of time. But I think we have a good track record of being able to do good projects. And I'd also share with the council that on some of the technology stuff, sometimes it's not always wise to be first, right? Sometimes, you know, being second or third, you learn from the mistakes that other folks have made. And so hopefully, as we do signal synchronization, we're going to be able to learn around the county. But the idea is to try to start doing something instead of doing nothing.
Right. And I know we're kind of asking you to look into a crystal ball that at this point is not very crystal. But one of the things that, you know, and I realize this too, you know, is that, you know, the shovel-ready projects, the projects that have matching funds available and ready to go are the ones that percolate up to the top. And I realize that. So, you know, and I don't look for that to change very much. But just wanted to encourage my colleagues, you know, that maybe we do need to be on this particular grant, on this particular item, that perhaps a more collaborative effort would be more successful than a standalone.
It may, but, you know, as I'm sitting out here and thinking out loud, and look, if indeed you're going to go through a relinquishment process, so, you know, maybe a faster way to get your synchronization is that maybe that's something you ought to request when you're working with the state, that before they give you the road. And I've had the benefit of having been on both sides. I've been Lori Berman in the past, and, you know, typically what the state's trying to do is, you know, try to set up the city or whoever the relinquishment is for success, right? So that you're giving them something that's in a good state of repair, and that it works. And so, you know, that, as I'm thinking out loud here, that may be a faster way than waiting for a measure that hasn't passed yet and criteria that hasn't been set up. But if indeed you go through the relinquishment process, that, you know, that may be an opportunity for you to work with the state of California, that those are some of the improvements that they do before they give the route to you guys, so that you end up with something that already works for you.
So just to clarify, the Navy, as part of their mitigation for the coastal campus, is committed to synchronizing the lights from Saturn all the way through Imperial Beach. So definitely,
You already have a
yeah. So
That's some way of doing
it's
that.
been approved in the budget. So
I just had a couple of more. Gary, on slide number 11, there was some statistics and that talked about, that's it. So this is from people who live outside of Imperial Beach but are traveling down to the South End.
Okay.
Does this include the Navy, as far as you know?
I don't know that, but I'd be happy to get, I mean, we're
Okay.
getting this right out of the census.
Okay,
And so I don't know whether it includes the Navy. That's a good question,
okay, all right. Thank you
but I'd be
then.
happy to get back.
Okay, I would like
you.
to know if it
Yeah.
includes that, because we do have a lot of military commuters, obviously.
Yeah, and my hunch is that we may not have this because, you know, so this is coming out of census data, and the census is tracking on how people answer where they live and where home's at. And, you know, the military is always a little bit of a challenge when we get
Right.
data from them, because they're transient, right?
Right.
The enlisted folk that's, you know, assigned to Coronado today may be in Baghdad tomorrow and maybe in Pensacola, Florida later. So I don't know, but I'd be glad to look at that and ask our researchers to validate that, and I can get back to you.
Okay,
At the last South County meeting I was at, and somebody's.
Yeah, Ray
saying that-
Major, our
Yeah,
economist, was
and
there. He's the
that
guy that
question
put this
came up
together.
as well. And a lot of the Navy, it was national security reasons why they weren't releasing a lot of their information.
Yeah, no, we've always had, whether it's housing or whether it's, you know, there's a lot of data that, you know, we don't always military's, very guarded in what they're able to share with us.
Okay. Two last things. I was at home on a Sunday afternoon, the telephone rings and it's a person doing a survey.
Okay,
And it was about this ballot measure.
cool.
And so, and it was a very lengthy survey. But the gal did an excellent job, covered almost everything. I did tell her at the end, who she was talking to, and I said, I'm really going to be an advocate for this. She kind of got a kick out of it. So again, I didn't see that included in the outreach, but it was very effective. I knew about it, but I thought, gee, for somebody else at home on a Sunday who takes this call, I thought it was a very effective.
I would share, and in working our pollster that's been doing the polling for us, has been John Neestad with Competitive Edge. And I'm always surprised that, because when you're putting these survey tools together, everybody has another question they want to ask, right? And so usually, how long can you keep somebody on the phone? And they shoot for no more than 20 minutes. It should be less than that. But I'm surprised somebody stays on the phone 20 minutes. But our experience has been that when you get them talking about stuff, and infrastructure is one of those things that is, my past communication director, Gary Bonelli, used to say, it slaps you in the morning and it slaps you in the evening on your way home. It's stuff that, people are passionate about because they're experiencing good or bad things on our transportation system every day.
One last comment, Gary. How have we put it to the voter that if this doesn't pass, what will happen?
I think we've had a fair amount of discussion at the board. So there's been public discussion in that way. But I don't know that we've done anything to communicate with the voters about whether, if it doesn't pass. But what happens if it doesn't pass is that $204 billion project has to squeeze down, because there are projects there that, that aren't going to happen if there's not the local dollars necessary to do that. And so we would have a smaller program. The purple line, as an example, would be a project that in all likelihood would be a casualty, because if you don't have local dollars, we're about to get $1 billion from the feds, but we had $1 billion. And so if the feds, through FTA, the Federal Transit Authority, if you don't have administration, if you don't have at least half of the dollars, you can't get in to compete. So there are projects on the plan that would be a casualty. And we've been focused on trying to talk about what's the plan. I don't know that we've probably done a good enough job, even though the board members have asked and we've had a conversation about it. But it's also somewhat hard always to answer that, because those are decisions the board will have to make in the future that it hasn't made yet, right? But there are significant consequences. The other thing I would share, and I use as an analogy, that the Transnet measure, one of the things that the local dollars have allowed us to do is be able to bond those dollars. And so we were able to take advantage of very historic low interest rates and a very competitive bidding environment. And so in the last 10 or 15 years, we've literally built about 30 years of projects in 10. And we accelerated everything because we took out the Visa card. And the Visa card was the Transnet Visa card, and we went to Wall Street and we borrowed. We're still borrowing. The board's going to review bond documents that would have us back in the bond market in August of this year. And we've got this borrowing and one more that we can do. And just like every Visa card, it's got its limits. So after that, that doesn't mean we won't be working on projects, but after that, we will have reached our debt limit. And so the money that comes in, it's we've tried to have what we would characterize as a level debt portfolio, so that we're paying a level debt piece. And so as the tax grows, there will be money to do beyond debt, but it'll be a pay-as-you-go process, and not a let's pull out the credit card and finance this thing. So there's two big projects in front of us, Mid-Coast being one of them, and the North Coast Corridor, which is a combination of rail improvements and highway improvements on I-5. And without this measure, if this measure wasn't to pass, and once those two projects are done, then instead of us, and right now the board just approved over $1 billion budget for this next year, most of that being in the capital program, because we're building a lot of stuff. those budgets are going to go from being $1 billion budgets to being maybe $100 million budgets, because there's our limit to borrow will have reached its capacity, and it'll slow down quite a bit.
Well, Gary, you just brought us full circle. So we started out talking about, the mantra, promises made, promises kept. And I really believe that needs to be a focal point of our campaign, because that tells the whole story.
We
Oh,
will
again?
pass that on to the campaign
All right.
folks.
Thank you. Great presentation, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for being here, and it's been illuminating to be on the board and see the evolution of the discussion. I was actually shocked to see that there are elected officials in San Diego that actually don't believe in public transit. So I would argue that really on the end of those who favor transit, we were pretty moderate in what we wanted. I think we accepted the 50% mark you set out originally, and then we just kept going down. But I think all of us were shocked to see this vociferous argument that public transit is a horrible investment. So I was also really impressed with how you and your staff really, and the chair really worked to get to a middle ground. And I think you see that balance. So I've been the one on the ground explaining to some of the folks in the Quality of Life Coalition that it'd be really great to wave a magic wand to get what they want. But the fact is there are 18 cities and 18 different people on that board, and a large percentage of them actually don't believe in public transit. So to think that somehow we're going to get a magic number of 100% public transit with this initiative is just living in a fantasy world. So that's been something really interesting. But
Mayor, if
what-
I
oh.
could add real quickly,
Yeah.
one of the things that I remind the board members and our staff and the public is that, you got to win this twice. You got to win it in the boardroom,
right.
but then you got to win it with the voters. And getting 2 out of every 3 voters having been involved in the one we did in 2004, we won by 2,500 votes out of 1 million that were cast on that ballot. And so it's a very, very diverse county. And, I just don't believe that you can either win it at let's say you can win it at the boardroom and get 100% transit. The research data doesn't suggest that we can win it with the public. And so you got to like win this thing twice, right? You got to win with the board, and then you got to also win with the public that pays the bills.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then, finally, I listened to a great radio show on NPR, and they had an extended interview with the transportation specialist at UCLA. And what he said was, everyone wants to fund shiny new brand new projects, which you're doing, which are important, but nobody funds operations. So I think it's really great that you guys have really decided to invest in operations, because he said that's where throughout the United States we're really lacking. So I think that's great. And finally, I think what I've seen in this city is that, the investments we're making in infrastructure comes from those grants we're getting from Sandaga. They've made a significant improvement in improving the quality of life of our residents throughout the city. And I congratulate this council who started that process before I was elected. But more importantly, I see this initiative as a significant benefit to our region. And it's very clear to me that for South County, the investments are really going to be in active transportation and public transit. That's where you see for that priority plan it's going to be. So it'll be a big help to our city, more importantly, South County. So anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and we really appreciate
Thank you for having
the
me.
time you've taken. Thanks. Great. We just have the final item 2.2, ratification of warrant register. And Councilman Spriggs, you had just questions about 3 items. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I'll try to get through them quickly because I know we have to go back into closed session right after this. So my questions, I guess, for my colleagues on the council member and anyone who's got the package are all on page 13. The items are on page 13 of the warrant register. And they are the 3 largest items on there. The first one is a $116,285,000 item having to do with URS Corporation and water quality improvement program. And the question was just to get a bit of information as to whether this is the only payment and what it pertains to.
Yeah, excuse me, but I brought the expert, Chris Hummer, to give you some details on that.
Smart man.
All right, so you're pulling out the water quality improvement plan for the Tijuana River project. This is a shared project we're doing with the city of San Diego, the county of San Diego, and Imperial Beach as part of it. Imperial Beach, our cost share on that is 13%. And this year's contract with URS is about $288,000. This invoice that you just got was covered most of the water quality monitoring. So if you were here in, I think it was probably in March, we had a big storm event, and we had a bunch of consultants gear out a storm for 24 hours taking water quality samples. So that's what covered this big invoice. But there will be a subsequent invoices for the remainder 288,000 for this project. But again, IB was only about 13% of that, with the cost share supplemented from the city and county of San Diego.
So that 116,000 represents our 13%.
No,
portion?
we are the contract management of, so we're essentially, IB is the bank. The city and county pay us money. So of that, what is it? Roughly.
Yeah, like 13,000. But like Chris was mentioning that not only that, we get an administration fee that covers our cost share portion. So generally these projects are paid for by other communities.
Okay, so there's an offset to that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thanks. The other question, the next item down is also having to do with sewer, is a sewer treatment payment, April through June, to the city of San Diego of $560,633. And if that's a quarterly payment that you multiply by 4, that's
2.2 million.
2.4, 2.3, something like
Mhm.
that, $1 million. Does that, and I've been off of the Metro Wastewater Committee for quite a while now, so I would normally be able to track what we're paying to our share, the audited share that we have. Is that what this represents, or is this, because it seems a little larger?
No, that's what that represents. And, we just went through the rate study analysis, and there was much more detail in that presentation. But I don't know if Chris, you have something to add to that, but that is our share of the Metro sewer fee.
And reading further down, we have a remaining balance. This is out of the sewer fund.
Mhm.
We have a remaining balance of only $364,000.
Yeah, that's in the technical services account, which this is paid from. Mhm.
Right. So is that and we've talked before about the need to increase our sewer rates, et cetera, because of our low reserves and our revenue balance is going down. Is this present any issues or problems that we should be concerned about?
No, actually, so we've completely paid our fees to the city. We do have about 300,000 left in the technical services account, but we still have a month and some invoices to come in, not from the city of San Diego. If you look at the total revenues, because we just about have received them all, and our total expenses, again, we still have a month or so to go. We're right on target with what the rate model was presented to you just a couple meetings ago. And of course, this is before the changes to the rates. So everything that was presented to you is exactly consistent with what I'm seeing in the general ledger. Of course, I collaborated with Karen on that.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Great. I would like to entertain a motion.
And there's one last one.
I thought you said you had 3.
I do.
Was that, that was second? Sorry.
Second
It
one.
seemed like 3. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I know. Sorry. The third one is the $24,154 item, which is it looks like street condition survey. And I also saw that has a general fund number associated with it, as opposed to something that's street specific.
Yeah, well, it is our streets department within our general fund. So Mr. Gallegos was here talking about the local streets program, and we fund a portion of that from those dollars. Our streets department is funded from Transnet dollars. So that's in our general fund, streets department funded by gas tax and Transnet, and our general fund. So those are the 3 sources of revenue for that.
Okay, I hadn't realized that we were using general fund as opposed to Transnet and gas tax.
We're required to use a portion of our general fund for street maintenance work. It's called our maintenance of effort. And it's what Sandag has required of us to do as part of that Transnet ordinance. And there's a fixed dollar amount of about $200,000 a year that we spend of general fund money on streets related maintenance.
And this particular amount, street condition survey do either of you know whether that was part of a larger street condition survey for the entire city or?
Yes, this is a citywide pavement assessment, and this is kind of what leads into prioritizing our capital projects, and in future meetings, there will be a final report presented to you of the condition of our streets now and which ones need to be fixed next.
Okay, that was exactly what I was asking. Are we going to see something in terms of the outcome of
Yeah,
that expenditure?
I think it's scheduled next meeting.
it is. I was just going to offer that we talked about that today. That's going to be at your next regularly scheduled meeting.
Great, perfect. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, council members, for indulging the questions.
I would like to entertain a motion to ratify the warrant register. Please vote.
Motion carried unanimously.
I would like to adjourn the meeting, and then do I need to call back the other closed session to order or no?
We would just adjourn into closed session.
Okay.